Good morning, members. We have formed a quorum, and now it's time to get started. Item 1 on the agenda, information paper issues since the last meeting. There's one. I gather you have all received it. Next item, items for discussion at the next meeting. The next meeting will be held on the 26th of June. It's a Monday at 8:30 p.m. Two proposed items from the government. First, monitoring of private recreational leases and community care fund. 2 items. Comments? No? Okay. So we have 2 items for the next meeting. The next item on the agenda, number 3, financial arrangement for the Property Management Services Authority. Please invite the government team to join us. Members, as this item is related to financial arrangement, please refer to ROP 83.8 and disclose the nature of your interest if you have direct or indirect pecuniary interest.
I'd like
to first invite Mr. Lau Kwok-fan to brief us on the paper. Thank you. Chairman, property is one of the most valuable assets of people in Hong Kong, and the Property Management Services Authority has always been working hard to handle property management, and it can help owners to fulfill requirements of property management. The Property Management Services Ordinance was passed in LegCo last year, and we mainly regulate and control the provision of property management services in Hong Kong, and to promote the integrity and also to maintain and enhance the status of the professional property management services. So the PMSA is a self-financing statutory body supported by income generated from both license fees and a small amount of fixed levy to be imposed on each conveyance on sale chargeable with stamp duty. As we have not yet set a maximum for the levy, we suggest that there should be a license fees increase, and because it needs time to look into the financial requirements, and in order to look into the 30 million to 60 million of recurrent expenditure per year, we suggest that the license could be around 1/3 of the license, and the levy can also will also help pay for 2/3 of it. And for the levy, we basically consider the conveyance in sales to come up with a suggestion on the levy fee. And earlier during the draft, we did raise it to LegCo and received support. The government has always been working with the industry to try to balance all considerations, and through the PMSO we set up the PMSA, and it has always been receiving the support of all parties in LegCo. I hope that we could receive your comments on the various proposals set out and to support us to seek approval for the proposed loan arrangement. We believe that it would help us to enhance the industry with the proposed loan arrangement, and it can also safeguard owners' rights. Thank you. Would any members like to speak We now have 3 members in line, Mr. Yu Si-wing, myself, and Mr. Yu Chong-yim. How about 4 minutes each? Mr. Yu Si-wing, please. Thank you, Chairman. In relation to the budget, well, it's very clear on the income on license and a levy. I'm not sure whether the penalty has also been included because there might be violations. Have you also considered the penalties received? In future, you might need to send out people to patrol or to do random checks of property management companies. Have you made any budget for it to have a team of patrol? And what would be the terms of reference for these people? Thirdly, there would be some companies who would not agree with your ruling, and they might appeal through hiring lawyers and seeking legal advice, and legal fees might reach up to 1 million. So have you considered or left any budget for legal cases? Thank you. Mr. Lau. Thank you. Oh, Mr. Well, yes, it would be an income, but and penalty would be part of the income. But we do not know how much we would receive in penalty, and the amount would not be huge. So we cannot put it in the recurrent fees. The PMSA will, under its operations, set up its own structure. And with the structure of the license fees, they can then decide how to investigate a complaint. For the legal fees related to appeal, there is an appeal mechanism as in other disciplinary committees. Well, before we really begin the license fee system, we are not sure how complicated the cases would be. So for details in operations, it will need some time after commencing this to really know what it would be like. Well, if that's the case, Chairman, a budget is related to future estimates. You must at least set a budget for how many people you would be hiring to conduct patrolling or investigation. Otherwise, you don't really need to hold this meeting today. And for legal costs, you also need to leave a certain budget. There should be at least an estimate on the budget. Mr. For accounting and for other budget, we have already left budget for those. But as to how many people you need to hire for patrolling or for dealing with complaints, it really depends on how many complaints we receive, and we don't know whether it really involves complicated legal issues to seek professional legal advice. Who would be responsible for this in the future? The PMSA will be in charge of that. The PMSA will deal with the complaints in its own structure. Well, I have a couple of questions to ask as well. Well, you estimate that at the initial stage you will need around 22 million to 30 million, but it seems that there is not a breakdown of how it would be used. Well, but you do have a cash table. Well, but of course, there would be such a budget as suggested by Mr. Yu Si-wing. So how much money would you leave for legal costs? So for each conveyance on sales, you've set an amount of $315. So how did you come up with this number? We know that the market changes accordingly. So how did you come up with the levy of $350 for each leviable instrument? There is no fund here. How can you ensure that it could become self-financed? Thank you, Chairman. When we discussed at the draft level, we already knew that license fees would not be adequate, because you do know that after estimating the license fees and the levy would also looking at the PMC and PMP, we believe that there should be a levy. And so when we discussed it preliminary, we believed that 250 to 350 would be a suitable amount. But in the past few years, we have seen a large number of conveyances. And so if we look at about 1 million cases per year, then it would probably be enough with a levy of $350. But we are talking only about a very small percentage. So when we look into the $80,000, we only looked at the average number of sales from 2012 to 2016. So we believe that it would be a stable amount. So I don't see how how the details would be. We are now looking into a loan to help its commencement, which means that it would need some sort of operation expenses in the initial stage. But then after receiving the licenses and the levies, we believe that in a few years the PMSA would become self-financed. We're applying for the 22 million to help it at its initial stage. For example, for the cost of offices, to design a computer system. No, my question is, how did you come up with the amount of 27 to 30 million? Well, we estimate that there will be 40 people as headcount, and we have also drawn reference from other in other organizations to see how many people they would need in the initial stage. Secretary, well, this is the initial stage. This is only asking for a loan for the initial stage, and then we would come back again, and then we could discuss further on the $350 on $350 levy. Well, we have estimated based on the different expenses, such as 80,000 for the conveyance costs, and so we did draw reference from other authorities. And when we discussed the draft, 350 was a number that was discussed for a long time, and we didn't want that the fee be too high or low. We want it to be a reasonable levy. Mr. Yu Chong-yin, please. Thank you. I have 3 questions. First, the industry already has many views on the appointed people on the authority. But we do not have too much information right now. I have to declare interest. I'm a surveyor, so I also work in the property management sector. The industry wants to know more about the details on how the members would be formed for the authority and whether there would be a deadline for the plans forward. Well, since there is nothing right now, it's very hard for us to come up with a figure because it seems very abstract. So I hope that you would give us a more clear roadmap for the future. I saw from the table that there are not too many details. You said you're hiring 40 people. So what salary grade are you talking about? How did you come up with this number? And I see that the fund would be exhausted in 2 years. Is that true? Why would all the money be used in 2 years? So what happens afterwards? Third question. You are seeking for a loan this time, but what would the mechanism be? So after this approval, would there be 28 million? So that's a set amount, or do you have to come back again for loan because you can already levy from the stamp duty? This is already stipulated in the law, but it doesn't state clearly how much money you will be asking for. So can you please tell us more about that? Thank you.
Chairman, with regard to the questions raised by Mr. Yu, when a statutory body has been set up and now we extend a loan, there may not be the need to have another loan in the future, because the statutory body is new and is self-financing, but they've only got members, not even staff have been appointed. And that's why there is no guideline, no CEO. So there's no way they can reach out to the community. So we would like to see the PMSA up and running as soon as possible by extending a loan to it so that it can get organized. We think that in 2 years' time they will be able to generate income through the levy. We don't want the PMSA to enjoy a large surplus, but neither do we want it to be in the red. So this time we offer a loan to the PMSA to get it started, but it's self-financing in the future. Actually, you can see in paragraph 20 that in mid-2018, we are going to introduce the regulation on license fees to LegCo under negative vetting. And for levy, we are going to introduce the regulation in 2017, April 2017, or fourth quarter 2017. Mr. Yu Si-wing, I think we should be rather err on the generous side in terms of the levy, because the PMSA is self-financing. If you can't generate sufficient revenue, you have to increase license fees. For example, 400, and there are 7,000 PMPs, Tier 2. So I hope you can provide more leeway under the levy scheme. Because we're talking about one-off levy for home buyers. It's one-off. It's not going to be a significant impact for the buyer. But for license fees, it's recurrent in nature. Or you have not made any provision for inspections. You may have to conduct a large number of inspections or to conduct undercover operations. I don't know whether you have make provisions for that. Well, we have heard the members' suggestions. We would consider them carefully. I want to refer to paragraph 18. This is the interest of the loan will be calculated at no gain, no loss rate. What is the no gain, no loss rate? And also, when will the loan mature? Chairman, in the footnote 4, we have already set out the meaning of the low gain, no loss rate, which is set at a certain percentage below the average best lending rate of note issuing banks. That percentage is the average spread between the average best lending rate for banks which in the past 10 years and the 12-month Hong Kong dollar interbank interest rate to be reviewed every 2 years. We believe that from 2020, the PMSA will be able to repay the loan in 5 years, in 5 equal annual installments, to be exact. Mr. Ho, well, I agree with Mr. Yu Si-wing that you should make more leeway for maneuver in terms of revenue. You are going to have spend $30 to $38 million, and if you are going to have 40 staff members, how many of them are senior people? And what's the approximate pay levels? And the PMSA may need to hire more, and you may have to pay more than $20,000 per month. And if you hire 3, it's going to cost you more than $1 million a year. And you may have to do inspection, and you may have to handle lawsuits. So $38 million may not be sufficient. In 2018, you are going to introduce the regulation on license fees. So it may be $6,000 for a PMC. And of course, statutory bodies do not apply for fee adjustments every year. At most, they can only apply for a fee adjustment once every 4 years. I'll ask my colleague to say something about the staff members to be hired by the PMSA. We understand the sentiments of members. We all want the PMSA to have the necessary capacity and manpower to do its job. So I promised the 2 members to take a look at the $350 license fee or levy. 350 was what we agreed when we discussed the bill. And the next stage, when we introduce the subsidiary legislation, members may wish to offer further comments on the license fees to be charged. Ms. Chair, we estimate that in the initial stage, there will be 40 staff members, 1 CEO, 2 general managers, and a few managers, as well as executive officers, providing executive support in IT and other services. For the CEO's pay, it will be reference to D2 officers of the government. The PMSA is going to conduct an open recruitment for its CEO, so that would and the pay would be determined only at that stage. But we expect it to be at the level of D2. I hope my members will understand the risk of adjustments in the future when they lend their support to do this. For example, there may be a need to handle additional or pay for additional legal costs. But the loan is for 2 years. And then at that time, PMSA will be able to collect the revenue through license fees and the levy. Mr. Kwok-fan, thank you. Thank you. I'm not a panel member. Thank you for giving me this chance to ask questions. I want to say something about the fees collected by the PMSA. The license fees are at acceptable levels. But for the $350 levy, well, I have some comments. We set up the PMSA because we want the government to exercise public power to monitor the work of PMCs. We wanted the government to shoulder the cost. But now the government wants the PMSA to be self-financing. Well, this is questionable because the government is not investing a lot into this. So they collect license fees and still the PMSA will impose a levy of $350 on each conveyance, because the PMSA is there to serve property owners. So this is very different from the payer, the user pays principle, because the government already collects stamp duties. So for owners, they have to pay another levy, which I think is unfair. This is a statutory body. It's a self-regulatory authority for the portray, of course, is also scrutinized by the public and this council. It's just like other professional body regulating their own industry. We would like PMSA to be self-financing. When the bill was passed, almost all members supported this approach in terms of license fees and the levy. And the license fees are, as Mr. Kwok said, set at acceptable levels. And the levy is $350 to be imposed on each conveyance on sale. Of course, it was acceptable back then. Should we make further adjustments now? Well, even if we are to do it, we cannot adjust it by too much. We need to allow the PMSA a suitable source of revenue. So why do you want to impose the levy on new conveyance? Well, I believe buyers of property would like to have quality property management services. But this is required by all owners, not just new buyers. Mr. Holden Chow. Do you have any estimated number of cases to be handled by the PMSA? You are going to have 40 staff members. Have you make reference to other authorities and regulatory bodies in coming up with this staff complement? And what sort of disputes would the PMSA be mainly concerned about?
Thirdly, would the PMSA also handle conciliation issues, because I think that it can play a role if they can also provide such services. Thank you. Who would like to address these questions? Ms. Wong? Oh, Director, Mr. Oh, thank you, Mr. Chow, for your questions. We estimate that there would be around 800 property management companies, and for PMPs there would be 4,000 in Tier 1, and for Tier 2 we're talking about 7,500. So we have attached this in Annex, this information Annex 4, and we need to look at the numbers to estimate how many people we need in support. We from the levies will be able to know the income of the PMCs, and then we would be able to see the cash flow as stated in Annex 4. We believe that in the first 2 years, with the initial loan from the government, the PMSA could have a surplus in the first 2 years. Conciliation is not the responsibility of the PMSA. The PMSA's role is to monitor the PMPs and the PMCs to ensure that there will be a professional level of property management services. For the number of people in Tier 1 or Tier 2, it would depend on the units managed by the PMCs. For PMPs, we would consider the educational attainment and qualifications. So there would be complaints about PMP and PMC's licenses, which would relate to professionalism of the companies. Therefore, the PMSA will not be able to deal with conflicts between PMCs and owners. Any follow-up? Yes. So I've heard that you say that it's only going to be promoting professionalism of the profession, but maybe there are cases of rudeness. These could actually be dealt with through simple conciliation methods. I want to ask if that can be handled under the PMSA. A brief response would suffice. Director, for enhancing the professionalism and attitude of PMPs, I'm sure the PMSA could help to conciliate such issues. Mr. Yeo Chong Yim, second round, 2 minutes, please. Thank you. Thank you. I just want to follow up on my question. So I asked about some details. The industry has a concern on Tier 1, Tier 2, 2, 3 members, because there now are different tiers. So this is actually appointed by the CE. So how do you ensure transparency of appointment? Because the industry found that it's very different from their understanding. So I hope that you would clarify how you appoint the members. You use the term self-financing. I think it might actually mislead the public. Well, now you are asking for a 22 million loan for the first 2 years. So how are you going to seek this fund? Would that be a part of the recurrent expenditure? Well, so you're talking about that there would be 80,000 conveyances per year, and you're seeking a levy of $350. Oh, I see from the footnote that you're talking about a 10%. So I'm not sure how the stamp duty will work. Would that be levied on the fixed income, or would it actually change accordingly? And third of all, for the licenses, the fee, of course, it would also fluctuate. So I hope that you can explain to us better explain to us why it is called a side financing, and how how you came up with all the other figures. Chairman, there should be so the members of the PMSA, of course, would need to have a balanced group with professionals from the industry and others, and the members would be appointed on a 3-year term. How about the second part of my question, Director? The loan has to be repaid, so this is a non-recurrent sum, and the levy and the license fees would be recurrent income. So if we set the levy at 350, then we'll be at 350. We talked about that 10% would be charged in the footnote. If you look at the fourth quarter of 2017, once it is approved, then there would only be a few months left, and therefore the levy and those few months could only be $350. Mr. LAU Kwok-fan, first round, 4 minutes, please. Chairman, I'm also concerned with the appointment of PMSA members. It seems that most of them are the committee members are Zhe Wei-chun, Wang Kwok, and then Chen Han-peng, Yip Zi-ming, Chen Han-peng. All of these are LegCo members. Why would you choose all these members? Mr. Zhe Wei-chun was also the chair of the ordinance. Mr. Wang Kwok-fan, a member, and therefore they are very familiar with the ordinance, and they came up with many views in helping with us look into the authority. Therefore, we believe that they are very appropriate. And for some other persons, they are from the district, and they're very familiar with owners' views, and therefore it can actually help us balance out the members. And we also have members from the professional sector. So this was actually the views back then. But there really are too many legislators. I think over 1/3 of them are legislators. Well, of course, you came up with the list. With so many legislators, other people would not have the opportunity to act as members of the PMSA. Mr. Kwok-fan asked about the levy. Well, every year you would return part of the rates, and for some you actually return 100 billion. Can you actually maybe not return part of the rates and instead use that money to help other people? I'm concerned about the small companies and individuals. Maybe you could try to help them this way, because chargeable rates are based on property as well. So maybe you can try to look at it from another perspective and oh, thank you, Mr. Leung. When we considered the levy, we also considered the administration fee. The PMSA needs to be balanced. No, I think you misunderstood my question. Well, because you return rates, maybe. But now you're actually returning rates to wealthy people who don't need that money. So you should not return the rates to the wealthy instead, and use those rates to help those in need. Do you understand what I mean? Director, I'm sorry. The rates, the chargeable rates, is actually related to public policy. Well, now you're also talking about public policy because you're asking the public for money. You're asking for taxpayers' money. Do you understand what I mean? This would be a user pay principle, and the user will need to. Well, you need to own a property before you can use it. Well, I don't own anything, so I'm not a user. Rates is a very broad issue. Tenants also need to pay rents. We now only charge the owners. Well, there's you can actually use the returned rates to help other people. Mr. Hu Ji-wei. Thank you, Chairman. In paragraph 5, you talked about the recurrent expenditure of the PMSA would be around 27 million. So what would the future structure be? And when you open up high managerial posts, would you need to apply to LegCo for opening up of the post, or can the PMSA decide on its own human resources structure? That's the first question. Secondly, maybe I didn't read it in detail. I'm not quite sure whether there is remuneration for the members of the PMSA. Secretary, they would not receive any remuneration. It's all on a voluntary basis. As the director said, there would be a 40-person structure with the CEO being the top. It would be around our grade level, pay level scale D2, which is in accordance with self-financed statutory bodies. And it does not need to go through LegCo because it is a statutory body. And the PMSA will be in charge of recruiting its own personnel. So that is similar to other authorities. So the pay scale would not see major changes in the future, right? So you will not suddenly say that you would give a much higher pay to the CEO. Am I right, Director? The PMSA is self-financed and its operations will be decided by the members. We now gave them this for reference that the maximum pay scale would be at D2 level. But of course it is up to the authority to decide whether they're able to recruit anybody on this pay level. The PMSA will approve the expenses each year, and the financial report would be submitted, and an audited accounts would be submitted to LegCo every year. Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Leung Kwok-fan, or second round, 2 minutes. Well, I'm trying to explain to you that the rates can really resolve all the issues. You only need to pay rates as an owner of property. But I don't know why you don't think this way. You're only trying to penalize those who own property. That's very unreasonable.
There's bound to be sufficient money from rates, and that's public finance. The government pays for something to be done. Can you give us a paper on how you appoint people to the PMSA? There seems to be a lot of inbreeding, and you are giving out these appointments as consolation prizes to politicians. This is the first term of the PMSA, so we'd like to appoint members from the 3 categories. Today, this paper is about the proposal to offer a loan to the PMSA to let it get started. As for the rates rebate, is not a recurrent arrangement. We don't want the PMSA to be suffering from instability in revenue. So a simple arrangement such as a levy is more appropriate, more stable. We have still one member who want to ask questions in the first round and another one for the second round. I'll draw a line here. Mr. Leung Chi-chung, first round, 4 minutes. I don't know whether my questions have been asked. I think the government's policy in setting up the PMSA is that following usual practice, such an authority should be self-financing. If you collect a levy, in order that the PMSA can be self-financing, then I'm a bit worried. For property conveyances, the number is about 8,000, and your revenue is $28 million. If the number of conveyances on sale drops because of the tightening of money supply, then you are going to suffer a loss. Then you may have to increase the license fees for PMCs, so $6,000. You have to adjust it upwards. Mr. Leung Kwok-fan proposes that you should use another revenue source, such as rates. What are you going to do if there is a big deficit? Secretary. Well, members, please note that the ordinance is already in force. At that time, at the time of passage, almost all members supported the imposition of the levy. So now we are talking about how to implement the ordinance. We cannot make changes that would go beyond the basic principles. And I agree with members that we hope the PMSA will have sufficient resources and capacity to do its job. So is $350 sufficient? When this was raised, I already promised to take a look again, because $350 as the levy was agreed by the members back then. Is this still appropriate? Well, today's paper is about offering a loan. The levy of $350 would be the subject of a piece of subsidiary legislation to be tabled later. But I have to stress that we should not collect too much. It will be ideal just to collect just sufficient to support the work of PMSA. So I hope members can support today's paper so that we can offer PMSA a loan. 2 minutes, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. My question is close to that raised by Mr. Leung Chi-chung, because the levy may fluctuate with the property market. So it's better that we have some contingency funds saved up for rainy days. And of course, we should not allow the PMSA to expand without limits. So it's best that in terms of finances, the PMSA would just make it financially. Given the current industry situation, PMSA may have to investigate a number of complaints. And if we look at the number of building blocks we have, and also the complaints received by the ICAC so far, the numbers are really alarming. Can you really cope with such cases? We don't know the complaint numbers or their complexity at this stage. For the PMP licenses, there is a grace period of 3 years. They may apply for a license, and then they may have another 3 years to obtain the necessary qualifications. So the full operation in terms of PMP licenses will only happen 6 years later. In the meantime, there will be a lot of publicity and public education efforts. So the caseload for the first 6 years should not be too heavy. All right, we have used up the time allowed for this particular item. So members, we don't oppose to the government's proposal to apply to the loan fund for a loan to the PMSA. Any objection to putting this application to the FC? No? Okay, so agreed. Next item, proposed injection into Elite Athletes Development Fund. We have the Secretary with us, Mr. Kang, Commissioner for Sports, and Ms. Patty Lai, PAS. Secretary, maybe you can introduce the paper. Before I do that, a reminder for members. Please refer to the Rule 83A. If you have any direct or indirect pecuniary interests related to this item, please declare the nature of your interest before you speak. Secretary, promotion of development of elite sports is one of the 3 objectives of the government sports project policies. We have in 2004 we injected $1.8 million into the redevelopment of Hong Kong SI project for athletes and junior athletes achieving top 1/3 at local NSA recognized events. They would receive support services from Hong Kong SI, such as sports science, medicine, strength and conditioning, and they also get other enhancement services. As at the end of March this year, a total of 1,277 athletes, including 554 full-time athletes, were receiving training support at Hong Kong Sports Institute and other elite sports which meet the criteria would also get financial and other support services from Hong Kong SI. In recent years, Hong Kong athletes has been achieving remarkable results. We need to provide long-term full support for our athletes, elite athletes, so that they can continue to thrive in the international sporting arena. Of the 60 NSAs supported by us, some are also receiving additional support from Hong Kong SI. With more and more athletes and NSAs and sports getting the support, and also the need to provide more comprehensive services. The growth of the expenditure of Hong Kong SI has registered 70% growth from 300 million to 2016-2017, 500 million dollars. And there's $6 billion of funds deposited in the Hong Kong MA in the foreign exchange fund, so as to generate an income for support of elite sports. But the rate of return has dropped to 2.8%, as at the end of the 2016-17 year, balance was around $6.53 billion. There's the need to therefore inject further funds into the elite sports fund, and I'm happy to take questions from members. 6 members: Yip Kian Yuan, Fernando Zhang, Christopher Zhang, Chen Chi-chin, Houghton Chow. We can have squeeze in one more round at most. So 4 minutes for the first round. Not I will have to cut the time for later rounds. Mr. Yip Kian Yuan. Of course, we all want to support elite athletes' development, but because of the external environment changes, the rate of return, the interest earned has dropped, and therefore we need to inject more funds. So the development is mainly funded through interest income. As we can see, such an arrangement is subject to impacts from the investment environment. At first, the investment return was higher, so now there's a need to inject further funds. Much will depend on our projection of the investment return in the future. And this is not unique to the Elite Sports Development Fund.
Very often, we use investment return to support many of our expenses. Therefore, the issue we are discussing today actually brings out a problem seen quite often nowadays. Well, you see the return rate has already been halved from 5.6% to 2.8%. But when the rate was 5.6%, investment return was very high. Would we also consider that since we're talking recurrent expenses, do we have to operate on the basis of a development fund? Can we freeze a sum, and then every year we would try to support it with interest? So I have 2 questions. What is the estimated investment return rate? The other is how are we going to deal with the fluctuation? Well, you have seen the crux of the matter. My colleague can give you more details on our principles. We hope that there would be enough resources for the EADF, for the athletes to continue to participate on the international level. Commissioner, thank you. So when we were set up, when Sports Institute was set up, the government supported it every year, and then because there were many financial issues, there was no, it was not steady enough. So we decided to set up a development fund to support operations. At that time, we also discussed the issue of fluctuation in investments. And we discussed with LegCo that when there was really a huge drop in return rate, then we could start using the seed capital. We've already used some of the seed capital, and if there is a need, then we could come to LegCo for an additional injection fund, which is exactly what we are doing today. Thank you. As we have another meeting in this room at 10:45. We are not able to extend our meeting today, so I hope that when you ask your questions, you allow ample time for answers. If you ask too long questions, then they will not able to be answered within 4 minutes. Dr. Fernando Cheung, thank you. Injecting 1 billion into the EADF. To continue support for the operation of HASI, we are very supportive of this idea. I think you should inject even more, maybe around 2 billion. The question here is how you use this money. We know that HASI has done a lot of work. I'm very concerned with the para or such as Paralympic sports, because very often we do not provide adequate support to the handicapped athletes. The government keeps on telling us that there is no full-time handicapped athletes. I think that they're only part-time athletes. So we don't see how you can actually bring this forward. So you said that you're also going in paragraph 9C. You said that you enhance support for disabled sports and disabled athletes. That disabled athletes or abled athletes would see standards and assessments in whether they're able to enter the elite level. I'm not sure whether the government has really worked on this plan. Well, right now I still don't see any plans in doing that, and I think that and I'm very disappointed. We're talking about disabled athletes who receive medals at the Paralympics. You're only providing 6,000 monthly support to them. But for the same level, abled athletes, they receive 30,000 per month. So that's a huge discrepancy. We cannot have such a discrimination. Even young people or youth already receive $9,000. So I want to ask government when, in accordance with the consultancy study on sports for persons with disabilities, you will actually have the same support for both abled and disabled athletes. Commissioner, thank you, Dr. Cheung, for your ideas. We have discussed this quite often before. We have collated the study results. So disabled athletes associations do not have the same views on that. There are many differing views. We see in overseas that there are some countries with full-time disabled athletes, some not. So we are now talking about how we can set out the details. So we would come back with the details with you later on. Well, that's very vague. So even if you're able to provide full-time support, that's not enough. You need other support as well. All right, so I have a few questions. We already have support, and we've seen in the last few years that the sports sector has really made huge achievements in the past few years. Of course, that is also attributed to the hard work of the athletes. But I think that our HKSI also played a huge role in assisting with such success. Well, although we are not able to get any medals at the previous Olympics, we still very satisfied with the achievements made. Why are you not asking for a larger injection and instead think of using the seed capital? I think that we should give actually a guarantee to the sports sector. We see this that we are now supporting more sports, and with the new Kai Tak sports stadium, we would need even more support in the sports sector. So can we further the injection so that there would be more development in this area? The Sports Institute also relies on other income. We see that there is still not huge support for sports. So can the government consider tax-free donations for sports? For example, if you donate to the Sports Institute and donate to the support of elite athletes, then it would be tax-free so as to encourage people to help support, and that could also alleviate government's expenses. Secretary, well, I agree with your viewpoint. Fluctuations in the market really impacts the returns rate. I'm sure many of you, including the chairman, hope that there would be more resources put in elite sports, and we are going to work hard towards this end. Some enterprises would consider injecting funds into sports, and that could also be some income for the HKSI. But should we try to make changes to the finances, it would involve many different policies. So I can only bring this idea back to the government for further discussion. Well, I need to declare interest. I don't have any pecuniary interest, but I'm on the board of HKSI. I want to suggest donations being made to the HKSI because, it is actually a public body. Maybe we could use that as a pilot to encourage people to help out. Well, yes, I understand your view, Chairman, but it has huge impact on financial income. Therefore, we can only discuss this further back at the government. Mr. Chang Wafong, thank you, Chairman. I am in full support of the injection of 1 billion into the EADF to ensure continued development in Hong Kong sports industry. I also want to try to understand the support for athletes and for staff in this area. You know that athletes need long time training. You said that there are 354 full-time athletes. So I want to ask how long the athletes train each week. So I'm sure they train at least 5 days a week and maybe at least 25 hours per day, 5 hours per week. So how do we ensure that other than training, they can also keep up with their academic performances? Many people are concerned with life after retirement for athletes. So do we have any support for retired athletes? Thank you. The Secretary. We agree with your view, Mr. Chung. We need to encourage more young people to participate in sports. Many elite athletes achieve high performances. You asked about academics. We are working very hard to the end that local universities would take in these students and to work with the athletes to attend school in flexible hours so that they can keep up with both training and academics. I'm very happy to say that the HASI has signed an MOU with the Chinese University of Hong Kong to arrange for athletes to study at Chinese University, which can also ensure them that they can continue their training. For example, the course might take 4 years, but they are able to study for a period of 8 years so that they can continue their training alongside with keeping up with academics.
And we are going to sign another MOU with Baptist University, and I'll be there at the signing ceremony for retired athletes. We would like to work out something with various sectors. Some of these athletes have been teaching in schools or providing relevant support services in NSA. We hope this will start a healthy cycle to promote sport. For primary and secondary schools, if they have a very good atmosphere for sports participation, if there are more class time or teaching time devoted to sports, this would also allow our retired athletes to be involved in the promotion of sports for all. Mr. Leung Chi-Chang. I believe most people, most members here will not object to the investment for elite athletes. The question is the pace. In 2012, there were 200 full-time athletes, full-time elite athletes. There are more than 300 in 2016-17. It's not a big growth. It's just 17% difference. Now you want to inject funds, and the balance has dropped from $7 billion to $6 billion. You're now going to top it up to $7 billion odd, and the money is deposited with the Hong Kong MA. Will the interest return mean that that you are going to see the stagnation of elite athletes. So I agree with Dr. Fernando Zhang. You should get a bigger injection so that we can provide more support. Do you expect the support for the elite athletes to be enhanced in the coming years? Chairman, from 2012 to 2017, in the 5-year period, the expenditure of Hong Kong SI increased by 70%. So the Hong Kong SI has spared no effort in helping elite athletes, which has not been affected by the changes in the investment return of the EADF. But since we have already used some of the principles summed, we need to make further injections to further support elite athletes. The question is, we are of the view that $1 billion as the new injection may not be sufficient, and you may have to come back in 4 or 5 years' time, and because you have not been able to factor in the economic fluctuations, you may not be able to get 6% in return. So it's a cycle. So are your calculations problematic? Our support is unwavered. Don't rest assured about that. Mr. Chan Chi-Chin, for elite athletes and elite sports, are they two separate things, or are elite sports established first before we have elite athletes? And is the support provided for 4 years? Because for 2 sports, there's no one under support. So does it mean that 4 years later, the 2 sports will be delisted as elite sports? And I also want to talk about support in terms of sports science and medicine. You talk about the need to retain the professionals. So you may be suffering a brain drain. Would the support be provided under individual elite sports rather than generally to all elite sports, for example, in terms of sports gear? Well, this is a parallel system. For elite athletes, if an athlete achieve good results, first 8, for example, in Asian Games or Olympic Games, there's a table showing the scores of different tournaments. As long as the athlete achieve the results required, he will become, or she will become an elite athlete, and he will get support from the Hong Kong SI. Elite sports meets the criteria under another table. For example, if the score is 6.5 to 9, it's a Tier A sport under elite sports. And then Hong Kong SI would allocate funds for full-time coaches to be hired, and other training support services will be granted. But that's different from the scholarship offer to individual athletes. As regards the second question of sports science personnel, is essentially allocated by the Hong Kong SI and not managed by individuals sports. Because of the popularity of sports in the community, there is a bigger demand for sports science professionals and their services. As a result, the Hong Kong SI has increased the number of posts, and also the pay has been enhanced in the coming Hong Kong SI development plan. Is the support cycle, a 4-year one? Yes. The review is conducted once every 4 years for the elite sports. Mr. Holden Chow. Thank you, Chairman. I think we are absolutely in support of the development of our elite athletes. I'd like to know the financial amount for elite athletes. Is the amount uniform among all elite athletes, irrespective of the sports they are in? And is there a mechanism for inclusion? For example, although they have not been able to win medals, but you see a potential and you invest resources in order to take them up in the performance level. So it's just like what you invest in a potential stock, in a stock with good potential. There are more than 1,200 athletes on scholarship. Every one of them would get something depending on the achievement. They get a few $1,000s to $39,000 a month. For full-time athletes, usually their performance are better. They will get higher monthly allowances. And on the other hand, there are potential athletes. So in addressing the members' questions, there are the young local junior athletes who are being trained as Hong Kong SI. So they're getting comparatively lower allowances. Well, since we have this mechanism, so how do you select the elite sports? Well, there are different tiers. A, B, C, Asian Games, Olympic Games, and so on and so forth. In recent years, Hong Kong athletes are performing rather well. For example, badminton and other sports. Did you select this as potential sports? Well, we have our Tier 1 with 19, including the table tennis, cycling, windsurfing. For Tier B, there are more than 30 sports. For every sport, we will take into account the performance of 2 adult athletes and 2 junior athletes, and we count the scores. If the score is a 6.5, or then it's a Tier B. Tier B, if it's more than 6.5, it's a Tier A. All the members who want to ask the question before I drew the line have done so. So who else would like to raise questions? We need to hand over the venue on time. Mr. Yu Si Wing and Dr. Fernando Zhang, I'll draw a line here. No more members may ask questions. We are all happy that our elite athletes win glory for Hong Kong, but we are also concerned about the future of these athletes. We know the support provided to them is to allow them to further their studies. In the future, are you going to subsidize NGOs to do some investment and to provide matching services so that these athletes can use their talents in the commercial sector? For the top-tier athletes, they are well known, but for the second-tier athletes, they should be allowed to take part in training or in tourism-related work. Or we can attract visitors to come to Hong Kong to participate in training so that we can provide a variety of career opportunities for athletes. Apart from government resources, we should also consider how best we can use community resources in helping our elite athletes, especially after their retirement. If Mr. Yi has concrete ideas, I'm happy to talk to him. Can you consider such propositions in terms of funding? Well, we have to we can only consider concrete proposals. Dr. Fernando Zhang, please raise your question in 1 minute. One of the questions have not been answered, and that is there a concrete timetable to allow the Paralympic disabled athletes to be full-time athletes? Well, the Commissioner has already answered the questions. We are now in a discussion with the disabled athletes associations, and then we'll come back after the discussion. Do we have a timetable? Well, the consultancy report has been completed. We are now in consultation with the stakeholders.
Chairman, I would like the administration on this development, since the consultancy study has been done last year, to present us with a paper before this item goes up to FC. Is that all right? Yes. Well, so we'll have to conclude this item because time is up. Before we conclude, I'd like to ask if everyone agrees to submitting this item to FC. All right, let us move on to agenda item 5, a write-off of an irrecoverable loss. So we have from the HAB, Madam Ho, from LCSD, Madam Leung and Madam Lee. Well, because this also relates to financial recommendation, so therefore if you have any pecuniary interest, please declare your interest. Under Secretary, Madam Hoi, can you please take us through the paper? Thank you. So this is actually an overpayment of housing allowances to a former ex-council contract staff of LCSD. The LCSD has tried in all channels to try to recover the loss, but to no avail. So the total amount proposed to be written off is $869,818.89. The LCSD has tried to recover the loss and has also conducted an internal investigation, and now has reviewed the internal control procedures for payment, and those responsible staff members have already been penalized. And as we are not able to recover this loss, we will now like to apply for a write-off for this irrecoverable loss. So this is a very brief introduction on the paper. Any questions from members? Well, if there are no questions on this item, then we would need to conclude this item. So are you all in support in seeking the approval of FC to write up the amount? No objections? All right. So this concludes our item. Next, agenda item 6, any other business. As we have not received any other business, I now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.